Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another ITY video. Today with me on my left, I have Mike Ellis. He's the CEO of ForgeRock. And on my right, I have Eve Mailer. She's the Vice President of Innovation and Emerging Technology at ForgeRock. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So I thought I'll always start with the same question. Please tell us about ForgeRock and a little bit about your roles and your history in the world of tech.
Great, thank you very much. Well, ForgeRock is a 7-year-old company. We are focused on helping companies and governments transform their business through digital identity. We're the leader, especially focused on driving digital identity use cases and value for customers, for IoT, and of course for employee as well, for large companies.
Sure. Now we're going to get in all of that in more detail in a moment. But what's a little of your history in the world of tech?
So I've been in the software business, believe it or not, for over 35 years. I'm thrilled to be the CEO of ForgeRock. We are an innovating, very, very fast-moving company in this space, and doing a lot of business actually in the ANZ marketplace. So we're extremely pleased to be here with you.
Sure. And Eve, I mean, as VP of Innovation and Emerging Technology, that's a very exciting field. Things always moving at a rapid pace. Tell us a little bit about your work at ForgeRock and a little bit about your own history.
Indeed. So at ForgeRock, I'm in the office of the CTO, and I drive privacy and consent innovation for ForgeRock, and I have a long history with standards, dating myself a little bit here. So I've worked in creating the XML standard, Extensible Markup Language.
Everyone should know that one.
I hope, and if anybody out there is an identity geek, you might know, hey, I'll find my people here. There's the standard assertion, security assertion markup language, which is the basis for federated single sign-on for so many implementations, and more recently user-managed access, which I imagine we'll talk a little bit more about.
Absolutely, yeah. So the other question I like to ask when people are visiting from overseas is why are you in Australia? Is there a conference or are you just visiting customers and staff?
Right, we actually have a digital summit that we're running this week here in Sydney.
Excellent.
And it's focused on really how do companies digitally transform their business through the use of identity. We have government sector here as well. Several hundred companies that are visiting us, and so we're excited to be hosting it, and we have many customers on stage as well talking about their experiences and their journey with us.
Excellent. And is this this been happening in Australia for many years, or this is the first one?
This is actually our first digital summit here in Sydney,
yeah.
But we've had customers and employees here for many years here, Australia and New Zealand.
And presumably you've had the digital summit overseas for many years.
We do. We've had it in Europe and the United States for about 4 years running now. So first time in ANZ, I'm very excited to be kicking it off here.
Sure, excellent. Now you have this a platform, the ForgeRock platform, but you've also got something called Identity and Access Manager, and this is something you speak about in your documentation about changing things from an internal employee-centric technology to an external customer-facing technology. So you can just listen to those the terms and you can sort of imagine why it had to take place, but why do you say it had to take place?
It's absolutely critical. The engagement with customers is really where the businesses are transforming. They are being pressured to provide not only a more provocative, more intimate, but more secure engagement with the customer. And how you do that is really on the very forefront of that motion, that energy, is digital identity and technology that enables you to do so. The legacy technologies that this industry is known for around identity is mainly focused on employee identity behind the firewall, really sign-on, single sign-on technology, etc. Today's world calls for something much more robust at a broad platform level, with lots of functionality that can enable you to scale in the 10x or 100x scale required to now turn that same technology on for your customers. And customers demand a more robust, intimate dialogue with their companies that they're doing business with, as well as their governments. And of course, trust is a big element of that. And so we'll talk more about that in a minute, but a platform play that enables you to do this at a more robust, more productive level,
and much more secure level too.
Much more secure, and also to do it in a frictionless way. Yeah. So you're starting to see biometrics play a role in this, where you can use thumbprint or iris or even voice recognition as ways that companies can interact with their customers in a much more easy but more secure way.
Yeah, seamless but more secure. So it's like effortless. You don't have to think about it, but you are secure.
Absolutely.
Now, this obviously dovetails into the fact that you have the ForgeRock platform, which you say is the first of its kind to fully implement the user-managed access standard for creating digital trust and privacy by consent. So tell us in more detail about that, because that's clearly the foundation of what you're offering to the marketplace.
Yes, indeed. So I mentioned that I've been involved with the user-managed access standard. So I actually founded the group that has created the standard. I still chair it today. And so we're the first platform that has supported this standard for use cases that impact individuals. And so what user-managed access and our implementation enables you to do is actually give finer-grained access to digital resources of yours wherever they are across the internet from a centralized kind of dashboard.
Yeah.
So if you imagine, think of it like the way Google Apps might be, where you've got a share button. And you're able to go back and take away access from somebody that you gave access to, or take away part of the access. For example, you have read access but not write access. Now this might be true for a digital resource like not just a document, but it might be an IoT device like a fitness wearable or an electronic health record or tax data or whatever it might be. So you can see where the power might come when your resources, such as they are all across the internet, are all across the smart home devices, the smart medical devices that we're all starting to collect.
Sure.
So user-managed access starts to become a thing that impacts your life in a positive way versus the way we've seen the world going with the Edward Snowden revelations, NSA, everybody spying on everybody else. You start to need that element of trust that businesses and governments can form with customers, citizens, patients, everybody.
And user-managed access is giving control back, or some measure of control back to the user.
Right.
I mean, they're the ones who, as you were talking about this granularity, want to say, well, you can look at this, you can look at that, but you can't look at this.
Yeah.
And this is clearly, even though it's so advanced, it's just we're at the beginning of it.
Think of it as consent and privacy.
Yeah.
So the reality of providing the power of opting in and opting out as a consumer or a citizen into certain data collection or applications, etc., becomes very empowering. And it's also, so empowering not only the citizen or consumer, but it's also an absolute, required component of this more intimate dialogue with the consumer from the company itself, from the enterprise.
In this 21st century modern era, I mean, you're clearly enabling companies to have this kind of relationship with their customers, and that's one of the things that you do.
Right. You have to maintain that trust.
Yeah.
You have to create that trust, especially as you're engaging in more dialogue with that consumer. You're serving them better with new applications, and consequently their ability to also opt in and opt out of what you do with that data is really important.
Yeah. I mean, and clearly you're going to be hearing your customers on stage talking about this to the attendees of your conference, so that they know this is now possible.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got the Australian Tax Office on stage, and SunSuper, and others that are on stage with us. TomTom from Europe, actually presenting how they're using us not only from a human element, but also from a digital identity for devices and things. Yeah. So you can also apply digital identity to IoT as well, which is also one of the key trends for a platform like this.
Yeah. And of course, with the Internet of Things, and there's so much extra data. I mean, we already talk about big data and having to manage all of that, and having to go through the overload. And of course, what we think is an overload is actually just a little tiny wave. The big tsunami is sort of now.
Yes, this is not futuristic. This is here. It's actually here now.
Now, one of the things you talk about is security companies building fences around data, and then you say that those fences need to be monitored, and then they need to be raised. And you ask the question, what if that data never needed fencing to begin with? So tell us about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's funny. Some of the advice that I've seen lately, and it sounds so obvious, is the best way to ensure that somebody doesn't misuse your data is not to share it in the first place. And it sounds obvious, and this is why a combination of user-managed access and a trust approach that starts from the hardware and goes all the way through to the services that are online is so important. And so, we have partnerships actually with the big chip makers to ensure that from the sensor to the device to the service,
Right.
you can start to build a kind of a chip-to-cloud security and trust approach with consent built in, so that you actually have security without compromise in trust and consent and an experience.
Yeah, I think alongside that, you also have this requirement where, especially in the EU, where you need to have identity information, it's personal information of the consumer resident in country. And so a technology that allows you to actually store that in country while still accessing certain elements of it with applications that are global is very, very important. And so this goes back to an identity platform that can enable all of those functions at the same time, as Eve said, all the way from the device and the thing, all the way through to the human, and even the data that gets thrown off by that interaction. You also want to be able to secure in the same way. So,
sure. And all of this is part of what you call, as having created, I guess, a customer-focused identity.
correct.
As opposed to identity that's just, issued to you by whichever company has got whatever, password and username and password recovery system in place.
Right.
I like to say, it's about identities where you're not the boss of them.
Yeah.
So it's really about identity relationship management. It's not, the identity and access management of old.
Right. This is a big concept around identity relationship management, and it's the identity of everything that you deal with all day long, your devices, your phone, your car, the data that gets thrown off by those transactions, and of course you as the person, in the relationship of those identities, those elements, and how they have a relationship and a trust and a consent that's involved in their interaction with the company you're doing business with.
I mean, there must be some devices you're going to interact with that don't need terribly strong security or encryption. Maybe it's like the bus timetables that are built into the shelter
Sure.
because you want to capture public transport. But then there might be other elements where you really need to have this deep relationship or this identity management system that is talking to your devices and encrypting them to the highest possible level so that nobody else is able to see your sleep patterns because it's your bed.
Right.
That's a great example. And I actually bought a bed that has the capability of, tracking how you sleep.
Yeah.
And you really have to think twice about who you share that with.
Where the data goes.
Yeah.
Hey, if you think about just last week in the States, there was a breach of a certain car manufacturer's cars. 30 cars were breached. In one day. Yeah. Well, actually, it was several days.
And was it Black Hat or something else that was announced at?
Black Hat.
Yeah,
I think it was. And you start to think about, all right, well, the telematics in the car, the cloud application was breached, all the way down to mobile devices, creating an identity secure layer from the smartphone to the car dashboard to the cloud application becomes absolutely strategic for that car manufacturer, for the services they're providing to that consumer driving the car. Today, you think about it, but consumer has a key fob, a physical thing that could be actually utilized by anyone, let alone someone actually short wiring the telematics in the car themselves. So a more critical security infrastructure is absolutely required. Identity is the element to make that happen, both at the human level, the smartphone, the telematics in the car, the application that governs that for that particular car manufacturer as well.
Now, one of the things you talk about is making things passwordless, no passwords at all. And clearly that's another thing that the ForgeRock identity platform can do. And how do you enable that? Obviously through the technology we've spoken about, but how do you really make it so that somebody can be passwordless?
Go ahead, Ian.
This is a great new feature that's in our platform. So to log in a passwordless fashion, you can enable a mobile device to basically vouch for you.
Sure.
So we know that things like Touch ID in an iPhone can enable you to use your fingerprint or thumbprint.
And many more apps and other HomeKit enabled devices are taking advantage of being able to authenticate that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have enabled that to let you register your device and let you log in through that device such that you only ever put in your identifier and you are never presented with an opportunity using this pattern to put in a password or the memorized passphrase or PIN code or anything that you have to memorize.
Yeah.
And you're just sort of seamlessly logged in by presenting the the biometric or whatever it is that other pattern using the mobile device scanning for you.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously,
So,
if the system is detecting something different, I mean, it could be with your smartphone, like on an iPhone, you have an M8 code chip that can, probably tell by the gait of your walk that, hey, that's not you. Someone's taken your phone and they're trying to log in as you.
So you can have physical gesture, you can have iris, biometric, all kinds of methods. And if you think about the use cases, I mean, banks today, as an example, are early adopters and early leaders in using biometrics to step up the level of authentication, the credentials of who am I actually dealing with as a consumer. So many of the banks have legacy systems where you have, heavy password use, and it's frictionful instead of frictionless in type of engagement with their consumer. And of course, they're helping the consumer transact, usually monetary transactions, so it's of high value. So now the ability to use a thumbprint or an iris print or what have you in that same journey becomes actually more secure but frictionless in terms of its engagement with the customer. It enables those banking institutions to actually do business in a better way. Hopefully, from their point of view and the consumer's point of view, they're going to get additional services from that bank because it's easier for them to do business with that bank. It's also more secure. And so we're seeing that across all industry sectors, banking, telco and media. Big customer of ours is BBC. They're using our technology in the iPlayer right now. And you'll see biometrics around that down the road as well. So very exciting around telco, media, banking, transportation, healthcare, etc. Where you'll see biometrics play a big role in identifying the who, but also identifying the what, the where, the when in regards to those transactions.
And I know the company is 7 years old. A lot of things happen in 7 years' time, and you've obviously had a lot of learnings. So what are your comments to companies? What are the best practices for design and architecture and implementing your technologies into a business that hasn't had this before, using old technology instead?
The most critical thing at first is for the company to look at identity technology as a next generational enabling technology. There is a historical legacy view on identity that is mainly just focused on employee identity behind the firewall, a sign-on and federation to other clouds or applications technology. Today, it is a much different enabling technology, not only for security, but also engaging your most important asset as an enterprise, your customer. And so, from an architectural standpoint, thinking about scale, you're not talking about 10,000 employees, you're talking about 10 million customers. Thinking about the breadth of functionalities that you're trying to deploy with identity. So you need a platform to utilize this, not a single set of point solutions from different vendors, but actually one platform that scales to 10 million or 200 million identities becomes a core element of how you deploy this type of technology and how you architect for the future. Because ultimately, your success is not based on phase 1 of 1,000 or 10,000 customers, but phase 10, which is all of the data elements and devices and things and machines, as well as the human customers that you're dealing with. Eve, any other points?
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add is, just like you're not the boss of them, the other thing about customer identity and external facing identity is you want that number of identities to grow. So, when it's employee identity, you think, boy, that's a cost center. And I really got to keep control of that, and I can tell them what to do. And with customer identity, you have to prepare for them, for that base to grow. And so there's all kinds of ways you need it to scale like crazy and prepare for that to do that. So that's when you really got to look for a platform to grow with you.
Sure. Now let's talk about the future. Now, Eve, you've been involved in creating the future for obviously many years now. But how do you see this whole industry and your market and your customers, everyone evolving, say, over the next decade or so? And I'll go to you, Mike.
Well, I live in the future. It's a very nice place.
We're all catching up.
Well, we've talked about some of the basics, I think. We know that there's some predictions about, each person is going to have up to 50 smart devices, smart sensors associated with them. So this is where identity relationship management really is a thing, because we're going to have to look at the relationships among people and devices and people and things, and among the devices and things themselves. and they're going to have to be dynamic relationships. They're going to have to change a lot. You think about, a police officer having a dynamic relationship with the fleet vehicle that they're assigned that day. And that's going to have to be accurately recorded and then broken down so that the data associated with the police officer gets associated with the right vehicle and never again thereafter.
And we need to know that the vehicle's been properly serviced and it's got all the right equipment inside of it.
Maintenance people and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then by the same token, the privacy and consent theme is only going to grow. In fact, consent is getting an outsized role in privacy and data protection. And security is actually, security is important, but it's table stakes in data protection. And the policy angle, the consent strategy of privacy, which is where it comes into it, but there's more than that.
Sure. And we'll be taking things like passwordless for granted.
Sure.
What did you want to add to it? Mike, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
The most important key element is if you think about today and you think about the amount of security risks that are inherent right now for the enterprise and government.
And the number of hack attacks that is reported all the time.
Breaches and hacks, etc. It's very obvious that the perimeter has gone away. The enterprise.
It's not a matter of if, but when.
Exactly. It's all the way to the endpoint. That endpoint is a device. It's data. It's machines. It's things. It's people.
It's not a matter of if or when, but how badly you're going to be hacked.
Exactly. And so
will you recover?
Being able to apply digital identity as a strategic element to every one of those endpoints, machines, data, people, things, becomes absolutely the core element for now, but also 10 years, 50 years in the future. Ultimately, everything that you deal with, everything you touch, every piece of data that gets thrown off by that interaction will have an identity. Today, we provide digital identity for customers that are have no humans or devices involved. It's an application talking to an application. It's a device talking to another device, a machine talking to a machine, as well as humans. So, you'll see this prevalent across the entire landscape worldwide. The last thing I'll leave you with on that strategic view of the future is identity is the most important element of all things going down in the future. It will be attached to everything.
Sure. No, that's extremely true. So look, as I get to the second last question of the interview, I always like to ask if you could please share the best piece of advice that either of you has ever received to help you get where you are today. And usually it's from a parent or a teacher or some mentor, and it's stuck with you, all these years.
Sure. Well, I'll start. Something that my folks told me over and over again is treat every day like it's your most important day. And served me well in my life.
That's very true.
Well, I had a prior life as an analyst, and the training I got there was be courageous, make the call. So that's the advice I'll share.
No, excellent. So what are your final messages for ITWire viewers and readers, and for your current and future customers?
Well, first of all, we're thrilled to be here in ANZ and kicking off the ForgeRock Digital Summit this week here. We're very, very excited about the journey and helping our customers innovate using our platform, using digital identity to really create high value for their businesses. Not just great security, but great high value for their businesses. And that's really how we value ourselves. It's not about just deploying technology, but it's actually driving the value that's created both at the customer level, the citizen level, and of course for the enterprise itself. So thank you very much for having us.
Great, thank you. And Eve?
I guess the last thing I might just say is, being about openness and transparency going along with our privacy and consent theme, near and dear to my heart, is we have a platform that's available as commercial open source, and if you go to forgerock.org, you can download and try before you buy, so check it out.
Sure, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.